So I've talked before about how I left the church during Prop 8. I was raised Mormon, born into the church, baptized at 8, and when Prop 8 hit California in, I believe it was 2010, I had an absolute faith crisis because I had a gay brother. And so for me, I was just like, wait, they're telling us how to vote? What? Like, they were saying really cringy stuff from the pulpit, too, of like, if you don't vote yes on Prop 8, then, the Lord is going to be separating the wheat from the tares. And like, Prop 8 was just a terrible time to be a member in Southern California. It was extremely hard. A lot of people had problems with it that lasted for years and years, and I was one of them. And so when this happened, when Prop 8 happened, I left the church for a short amount of time, but like it was really hard for me to do that because I didn't have any compass, and I was truly looking back now, I'm recognizing I was in a really lonely, emotionally abandoning marriage. And so I didn't have any safety. I didn't have a lot of people around me that like truly were providing safety for me and caring for me. And if I'm being honest, I had a lot of unresolved childhood trauma that I had never faced. And so it was like when I left the church in 2010 because of Prop 8, it's not like I had some big declaration that I'm leaving or anything. I just kind of stepped away and I started to I had alcohol and I started to try different things that I had never been able to actually have experiences with. I was like a boat without a rudder. I didn't know where I was going. I was aimless. I was confused. And so it led to a lot of self-abandoning, kind of reckless behavior that hurt people. And so I went back to the church because the church felt safe. And when I went back to the church, I did a counsel. I went through the repentance process. I was disfellowshipped, so I couldn't speak in church. And I don't think that we really have these penalizing things anymore in the church. It's very different now. But when I first had those experiences in 2010, it was the first time I had ever made any choices outside of the very rigid, stringent rule, code, and book that the church gave to me my whole life. It was the very first time I'd ever had alcohol, and I was 40. I was 33 or something. So it was the first time I'd ever really deviated. And so I went back and I did the whole repentance process thing. And, looking back, it was there were some traumatizing parts to it. Sitting in a stake high council with 15 men was very intimidating and scary. At the same time, though, it was loving. And it was what I needed and wanted at the time to have redemption, because I felt so guilty about what I had done. And I felt like I had really destroyed lives and I had hurt people, and I wanted redemption. And so coming back to the church in that time in 2010 was it was very cathartic for me. It felt safe again. I felt like I had direction again. It felt like I had a moral compass, and I felt safe in it. And I remember feeling relieved and feeling like I'm never going to leave again. I'm never going to leave this again. It feels so good. But unless you change patterns and you heal, you will repeat the past. And so 10 years later, that's what ended up happening. I ended up getting really involved in I got on the Exmo Reddit side of life. I got on Exmo TikTok, and I read the CES letter, and I started to go down church history and research it. And the reason I did that is I'm a very curious intellectual person, and I hadn't really broken it down the 10 years prior when I had problems with the church. I just kind of bandaged it up and put a Band-Aid on my doubts because I was so seeking redemption, and I wanted so bad to just come back to a direction that gave me safety. And I felt so unsafe out in the world without a rudder. And so I came back for that reason. But I had never really done church research. And I mean, to get really, really personal here, I was in a really unhappy situation in my life, and it reflected a lot of the relationships I had had my whole life, that I was unchosen. I felt unsafe. There wasn't any emotional vulnerability. There was no emotional connection. There was no emotional intimacy. It was just kind of us going through the motions and just kind of doing what we needed to do to meet our duties, but there was no love or safety. In fact, there had been a lot of unsafety in the past in our relationship where I was put in a place of feeling very unsafe, and not in like a, emotionally, I'll say emotionally unsafe. Okay, not physically, never physically unsafe, but emotionally unsafe. So it was like I was just really unhappy, and there was a part of me deep within that just felt like I needed to find myself, and I needed to make the choice to get out of that relationship. But you don't know what you don't know, and I didn't know at the time that that's what it was. I thought it was just like me needing to explore this stuff and needing to go down these rabbit holes of church doctrine and church history. It was just like this need and yearning I felt like I had. And I'm not even going to say that it was like me being tempted or anything like that. It was just, I needed to like deconstruct my faith. I needed to break it down truly and resolve it once and for all and figure out what I believed. And so when I read the CES letter and I was on these ex-Mormon sites and forums, it led me for 7 years away from the church. In fact, I was so convinced that the church wasn't true that I had my records removed. I sent a letter into Salt Lake and I had my records removed about a year after I read the CES letter. And I gave the CES letter to friends, and I gave it to my husband at the time, and I said, you need to read this. Like, I'm really worried about, like whether or not the church is true. Like, have we been investing our entire life into something that's not true? Like, we need to know about this. And so, yeah, I had them removed, the records removed. And then as I lived out here in the secular world and I had to like construct my own spirituality, and I had to like really dive deep into what I believed, that led to me having to heal myself. That led to me having to face the childhood trauma that I experienced and like the things I went through that, led me into the relationship that I was in, because chaos and instability and not being chosen emotionally felt safe to me. And so I repeated that in my relationship where I just constantly felt dysregulated and I didn't feel safe and there was no emotional intimacy. And so that led to me finally getting out of that marriage, that long marriage that really kept me tethered to the church. It kept me tethered to, or in the relationship, because it was all the safety that I'd ever known. Even though it wasn't safe, it was as safe as I could get in my life, even though it wasn't good for me, and it represented a lot of unhealed wounds and like patterns of relationships where I wasn't chosen and I was put in unsafe situations emotionally. And so when I got out of the marriage, it was like, it was what my soul needed, and my soul needed it for a really long time. And I don't know that I could have ever done it while I was in the church. I just don't. I think we were both so committed to the idea of an eternal family, and the idea of like keeping the family together and close knit, that it would have never happened. And I can look back now and like hindsight is 2020, but when you're in it, you're just feeling your way through, right? And you're just trying to make the next right choice. But for 5 or 6 years, I was out here just being single and like working on myself, healing, doing inner child healing, finally healing the traumas and triggers that I'd been running from my whole life, and that, had led me to make these choices and have to break down my religion and have to like leave it for a time. And what ultimately happened is all of that healing and all of the choices I made for myself, like to stop drinking and to, be single for a while and just be okay with my own company and heal myself and pour into myself and my hopes and dreams. It led to me meeting my divine counterpart, who happened to be also a member of the church but inactive. And I'm sorry, that's a God thing. That is a God thing. And so together we decided we wanted to go back to church and we wanted to figure it out and explore it. And since we've come back to the church, it's been so amazing. And it's almost like this full circle moment, and it feels so whole now, because not only have I gotten out of relationships that didn't serve me and that were hurting me, but I healed myself and I made the choice to come back from such a spiritually open-minded and actualized place, that being back at church now feels like a completely different experience. But at the same time, it feels so comforting. It feels like home, and it feels so safe and right where I'm supposed to be.